Being a single mom isn't easy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Every sleepless night, diaper change, and late-night feeding was worth it for moments like this, seeing my baby girl, Ava, resting peacefully in her crib. At 7 months old, she was finally settling into a bedtime routine, which meant I could steal a few quiet hours for myself in the evenings. It was mid-August, and the humid summer air lingered outside as the soft hum of the air conditioning filled the house. I had just put Ava down for the night, tucking her into her crib and turning on the baby monitor. The warm glow of her nightlight bathed the room in a calming amber hue. After adjusting the monitor's angle to get a clear view of her, I retreated to the living room, ready to indulge in a mindless reality show and let the day's stress melt away. The baby monitor sat on the coffee table next to my cup of tea, its low static providing a weird sense of comfort. About an hour into my show, I heard it, Ava's name. At first, I wasn't sure. It was faint, like a whisper that could have easily been part of the TV's background noise. But the voice didn't match what was on screen. I froze, turning my head toward the monitor. The screen showed Ava sound asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. The room looked exactly as I'd left it. My ears strained to pick up any sound, my heart already starting to pound. Was I imagining things? I leaned in closer, the glow of the monitor illuminating my anxious face. The voice came again, deep, raspy, and unmistakably male. Ava. A chill shot down my spine, my breath catching in my throat. I felt nauseous, my mind racing to explain what I had just heard. Was it interference from a nearby device? Could the monitor have been hacked? The idea of someone tapping into the monitor and watching my baby made me want to throw the device across the room. Then, out of the corner of the monitor screen, I saw something, a shadow. It moved, barely noticeable, but it was there. The dark form seemed to lean toward Ava's crib. My body reacted before my mind could fully process what I had seen. I grabbed the monitor and bolted toward the nursery, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor as adrenaline propelled me forward. The door to the nursery swung open with a bang, and I flipped on the light, scanning the room wildly. My breath came in ragged gasps as I searched every corner. The shadow was gone. Ava stirred in her crib, whimpering slightly at the sudden brightness, but she was alone. I checked the window, it was locked, just as I had left it. I threw open the closet doors, my hands shaking as I moved through piles of baby clothes and boxes. Nothing. I even dropped to my knees and peered under the crib, finding nothing but a few stray pacifiers and a stuffed bunny. My mind raced, battling between relief and paranoia. Had I imagined the shadow? Was the voice just a bizarre glitch, some random interference from a neighbor's baby monitor? I scooped Ava into my arms, clutching her against my chest as I continued to scan the room. My instincts screamed at me not to put her back in the crib, not after what I'd just seen, or thought I'd seen. I carried her back to the living room and set her gently in the playpen, keeping her close while I tried to calm my frayed nerves. I paced the room, replaying the events in my head, searching for any logical explanation. That's when I heard it again, a faint knock on the living room window. My body went rigid, and I turned slowly toward the sound. The curtains fluttered slightly from the air vent beneath the window, but the knock had been real. Nearly paralyzed with fear, I crept toward the window, my hands trembling as I reached for the edge of the curtain. I peeled it back just enough to peek outside, my breath hitching as I scanned the street. Nothing. The driveway was empty, and the houses across the street stood in their usual quiet stillness. I let the curtain fall back into place and backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I couldn't do this. I couldn't spend another minute in this house, questioning every sound and shadow. Without thinking, I unplugged the baby monitor, yanked the cord from the wall, and tossed the device onto the couch like it was cursed. My first instinct was to call the police, but what would I even say? Hi, I think someone's whispering through my baby monitor. They'd think I was crazy. Instead, I grabbed Ava, my keys, and my phone and headed for the car. The night air was thick and warm as I strapped her into the car seat, my fingers fumbling with the buckles. As I pulled out of the driveway, I couldn't help but glance at the house one last time. The windows stared back at me, dark and silent. I didn't know what I was running from, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I drove straight to my sister Rachel's house on the other side of town. Ava dozed off in the back seat, her soft breathing a small comfort against the chaos swirling in my mind. Rachel didn't ask many questions when I arrived on her doorstep with a diaper bag and tear-filled eyes. I offered a vague excuse about technical issues with the monitor, and she nodded, leading me to the guest room without pushing for details. But as I lay there that night, Ava sleeping soundly beside me, I couldn't shake the image of the shadow near her crib or the voice that had whispered her name. I barely slept, haunted by the possibility that something, or someone, had been in that room with her. The next morning, I returned home with Rachel by my side. I didn't want to go back alone. The house was eerily still, exactly as I had left it, except for one unsettling detail: the nursery window was unlocked. My heart sank. I knew I had locked it the night before. I always did. Panic clawed at my chest as I dialed the police. They arrived quickly, conducting a thorough search of the house. But, just like before, they found no signs of forced entry, no footprints outside, and no evidence of anyone breaking in. One officer suggested it could have been a technical glitch or interference from a nearby device, but his words felt hollow. They didn't explain the unlocked window. They didn't explain the voice. That evening, I replaced the baby monitor with a new, encrypted model and installed motion sensor lights around the house. I ordered a security camera for the front door and told myself that the nightmare was over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. A week passed, and I began to convince myself that maybe the strange events had been some kind of glitch or a figment of my overworked imagination. But just when I was starting to feel the tiniest bit of normalcy return, the nightmare came back. I was folding laundry in the living room when the new monitor, with all its high-tech features and encrypted security, suddenly crackled to life. I paused, my fingers frozen on one of Ava's tiny onesies. Then, I heard it, Ava's name, whispered softly but unmistakably. The sound wasn't static. It wasn't interference. It was deliberate. My pulse spiked as fear gripped me. Without a second thought, I grabbed my phone and called 911. As I waited for the operator to answer, I locked every door and window in the house, moving quickly from room to room while clutching Ava to my chest. The operator's voice on the other end was calm, but I wasn't. I barely registered what she said beyond the reassurance that police were on their way. I sat on the couch, holding Ava tightly, her warmth grounding me as I stared at the windows and doors, half expecting something, or someone, to appear. My mind raced with questions. How was this happening again? How had it found a way back in? The minutes dragged on until the flashing lights of the police car finally illuminated my street. 2 officers entered the house, their presence a temporary comfort. They moved methodically through every room, checking closets, windows, and doors. One officer even inspected the attic and crawl space. I followed behind them, desperate for answers, but once again, they found nothing. No intruders, no sign of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been inside the house other than me and Ava. As they left, the officer on duty gave me the same polite yet dismissive advice as before: stay vigilant, keep the doors locked, and call if anything else happens. But the words felt hollow, like a rehearsed script for situations they didn't really believe in. They weren't living through it. I was. I thanked them and closed the door behind them, but the moment I turned the lock, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't bear another night of restless pacing and paranoid glances at the monitor. I packed a bag for Ava and me as quickly as I could. Diapers, formula, clothes, I didn't care if I forgot something important. I just needed to leave. I drove straight to Jessica's house. When she opened the door, the concern in her eyes mirrored the turmoil I was feeling inside. I didn't explain much beyond the fact that something was wrong with the monitor again. She didn't press for details. Instead, she helped me settle Ava into the guest room, and we sat together in the kitchen long into the night. I stared at my cup of tea, the steam curling lazily upward, but I didn't take a sip. My thoughts spiraled. Should I call a security company and install more cameras and alarms? Or should I take a completely different route and call a priest to cleanse the house of whatever was haunting it? The idea sounded ridiculous, but then again, none of this felt normal. My mind was at war with itself, caught between logic and instinct. The next 2 months were a blur. I stayed at Jessica's longer than I ever expected. 2 months of trying to explain away my absence to coworkers with vague excuses about family emergencies. 2 months of listening to Jessica's reassurances while knowing deep down that she was just as scared as I was. I could see it every time a sudden noise made me jump or when I sat up in the middle of the night, straining to listen for something only I seemed to hear. She didn't say it out loud, but her eyes told me she thought I was slowly unraveling. Honestly, I thought so too. Eventually, I realized that hiding out at Jessica's house wasn't a permanent solution. I had to face the fear head-on, even though the thought of bringing Ava back into that house made my stomach churn. I took every precaution I could think of. I moved Ava's crib into my bedroom, right next to my bed, so I could reach out and touch her blanket whenever I needed reassurance that she was there and safe. The new baby monitor stayed in the drawer, untouched. I couldn't even look at it without my chest tightening. I installed additional locks on the windows and doors and set up security cameras in every room. I was trying to create a fortress, but the reality was that my fear wasn't something I could keep out with deadbolts and motion sensors. Days turned into weeks, and the weeks stretched into months. Slowly, the house began to feel normal again, or at least, as normal as it could after everything that had happened. There were no more voices, no more shadows near Ava's crib, and no strange knocks on the windows. But the peace was fragile, like a thin layer of ice over a deep, dark lake. Every time Ava fell asleep, I found myself watching her for longer than necessary, just to make sure she was still breathing. Relief would wash over me, followed by the gnawing unease that the terror could return at any moment. Nights were the hardest. When the house was quiet, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the space, my mind would go into overdrive. I would sit in bed, ears straining for the faintest sound, waiting for the nightmare to announce its return. Sometimes I thought I heard something, a creak in the floorboards or the distant rustle of leaves against the window, and my body would tense, ready to spring into action. But nothing ever happened. The fear became part of my routine, woven into the fabric of my daily life. I would fold Ava's clothes and wonder if I had done the right thing by coming back. Had I invited the danger back into our lives by returning to this house? I didn't know. And I wasn't sure I would ever get an answer. The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I had no choice but to live with it. As Ava grew, her laughter filled the house, pushing back some of the darkness that had taken root in my mind. But the paranoia never fully left me. I couldn't forget the voice that had called her name, or the shadow that had leaned over her crib, or the way the nursery window had somehow been unlocked. Whether the threat had been human or something else entirely, I would never know. But I had made one thing abundantly clear to myself: I would never let my guard down again. If there was one lesson I had learned, it was that fear could live quietly in the corners of your home, waiting for the perfect moment to make itself known. And I was determined to be ready when it did. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching the figure glide back into the shadows with an unsettling grace, as if gravity had no real hold on it. The movement wasn't abrupt or clumsy, just unnervingly smooth, like it had practiced this disappearing act 1,000 times before. My breath hitched, and for a moment, all logic begged me to turn around, head back to my room, lock the door, and pretend none of this had happened. But curiosity, and maybe a little bit of recklessness, won out. I pulled my phone from my pocket and switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the dim corridor ahead. Slowly, step by step, I advanced to where the figure had been standing. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out the sound of my shoes on the cold tile. When I reached the end of the hallway, I found nothing, just the closed door to the stairwell. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, the door creaking softly as it swung outward. I pointed my flashlight down the stairs, half expecting to see something lurking on the next landing. But the staircase was empty, the silence inside pressing against my ears. I stood there for another moment, straining to hear any sign of movement, footsteps, breathing, the rustle of clothes, but there was nothing. With a shaky exhale, I shook my head, trying to dismiss the growing unease crawling up my spine. "You're just tired," I whispered to myself, as if saying it aloud would make it true. "It's probably nothing." Back in my room, I locked the door and slid the bolt into place, as if that thin barrier could somehow shield me from whatever I had seen or imagined. My desk lamp cast a warm, familiar glow over my laptop screen, but the blinking cursor in my unfinished document only made me more aware of how unsettled I felt. I sat down, fingers hovering over the keyboard, but no matter how hard I tried to focus, my gaze kept drifting to the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that it might open at any moment. And then, as if on cue, the doorknob jiggled. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The knob rattled again, a subtle but deliberate movement, like someone was testing to see if it was locked. My pulse skyrocketed as fear rooted me in place, my eyes glued to the metal knob that twisted ever so slightly before falling still. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the rapid thud of my heartbeat. Swallowing hard, I grabbed my phone again, clutching it like a makeshift weapon as I inched toward the door. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "Who's there?" Silence. I pressed my ear against the door, listening for the faintest sound on the other side, footsteps, breathing, anything. But the hallway beyond was deathly quiet. When the silence stretched on for too long, I finally mustered the courage to unlock the door and pull it open. The corridor was empty, just as it had been before. My flashlight illuminated nothing but bare walls and the same dull tile floor. I stood there, half expecting the figure to reappear, but the shadows remained undisturbed. I locked the door again, this time sliding my desk chair in front of it for good measure. My hands trembled as I opened my messaging app and fired off a text to my roommate. "Hey man, you didn't come back to the dorm tonight, right?" I sat on the edge of my bed, waiting for the reply with my heart still pounding. A few minutes later, Ryan's response came through, "Nope." Why? I stared at the screen, my mind racing. If it wasn't Ryan, then who, or what, had been outside my door? Desperate for answers, I opened the dorm's group chat. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I framed my question carefully. Has anyone noticed anything weird in the dorm tonight? Like someone walking around or strange noises? Almost immediately, replies began flooding in. "Weird you say that. I thought I saw someone standing outside my door last night, but when I checked, no one was there." "Dude, same here. I thought it was just my imagination." "Wait, this has been happening all week. I heard footsteps in the hall, but no one was there when I looked." The more I read, the more my skin crawled. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't the only one experiencing something strange. But no one seemed to have any concrete answers. Theories ranged from sleep-deprived hallucinations to elaborate pranks, but nothing explained the consistent sightings of a shadowy figure or the eerie silence that accompanied it. As I scrolled through the messages, the lights in my room flickered. My head snapped up, my stomach twisting into a knot. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the power to cut out completely, but the light stabilized after a few seconds. Still, the brief flicker was enough to set my nerves on edge for the rest of the night. I barely slept. Every sound, no matter how small, made me sit up and listen, my muscles tensed and ready. But nothing happened. The next morning, exhausted and running on pure adrenaline, I decided to ask around in person. I started with the girl who lived down the hall. When I mentioned the figure, her reaction was immediate. She looked up sharply, her eyes wide with recognition. "You saw it too," she whispered, her voice trembling. Within an hour, word had spread, and a small group of us had gathered in the common area, each sharing our experiences. The details varied. Some had seen the figure at the end of the hall, while others claimed it had been standing outside their door. One guy even swore he had heard it whisper his name, though no one else reported hearing voices. But the most unsettling part was the consistency. The figure was always described the same way, tall, dark, and unnervingly silent. What puzzled us was the randomness of the appearances. There was no pattern, no specific time or location. It could show up anywhere, at any time, and then vanish without a trace. Someone suggested we all leave for the weekend to see if the figure would disappear in our absence. No one argued. By that evening, the dorm was practically deserted. We all stayed with friends or family, refusing to return until Monday morning. When we finally came back, something had changed. The atmosphere felt lighter, as if the oppressive weight that had hung over the building had lifted. No one saw the figure again. It became a mystery we whispered about over meals or late at night, a strange story that none of us could quite let go of. Even now, months later, I still wonder what it wanted, or why it had been there in the first place. Whatever the reason, one thing was certain, it wasn't just in my head. It had been real. And that thought keeps me up some nights, staring at my locked door, wondering if it'll ever decide to come back. Months have passed, but the memory of that night in the dorm still lingers, resurfacing whenever I find myself alone in the dark. Whatever the figure was, it vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only questions that will likely never be answered. Sometimes, I wonder if it was waiting for something, an invitation, an opening, a moment when the boundary between its world and mine blurred. I'll never truly know, but one thing is certain, it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real. And on sleepless nights, I still find myself staring at the door, half expecting to see it open slowly, revealing that silent shadow waiting to return. The transition from college uncertainty to the steady monotony of adult life didn't exactly bring the comfort I hoped it would. Working the night shift as a security guard wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable. I liked it that way. My routine revolved around patrolling the halls, monitoring the security cameras, and checking that all the doors were locked, simple, repetitive, and free of surprises. The building itself was a mid-sized corporate office located in downtown Chicago. During the day, it buzzed with activity, the hum of conference calls, the tapping of keyboards, and the smell of burnt coffee wafting through the air. But once the sun set, the office transformed into a hollow, silent shell. For most of my shifts, I relished that emptiness. I could pace the hallways without interruption, the quiet hum of the heating vents my only companion. But in December 2021, that comfort evaporated during a night I'll never forget. It was around 2 a.m., and I was returning to the security office after finishing my second patrol. I had just settled into my chair, scrolling aimlessly through my phone while half watching the camera feeds, when a loud creak jolted me upright. The sound was followed by the sharp slam of a door, reverberating through the east wing, a section of the building that had been sealed off for renovations. No one should have been there. My eyes darted to the monitor displaying the east wing hallway. The corridor appeared empty, but my gut told me something was off. As I leaned closer, movement flickered on the screen, a figure dressed in dark clothing slowly making its way down the hallway. My breath hitched as I watched it stop in front of the conference room, the same room that had been locked for weeks. The figure didn't knock or try the handle. It just stood there, as if waiting for an unseen signal. Grabbing my flashlight and radio, I bolted out of the security office, my pulse thundering in my chest. The silence that had once been comforting now suffocated me, every creak of my shoes echoing down the empty corridors like a warning. By the time I reached the east wing, sweat had gathered at the base of my neck despite the chill in the air. The dim glow of emergency lights flickered faintly, casting long, warped shadows against the walls. I stopped just outside the conference room and noticed the door was slightly ajar. My fingers tightened around the flashlight. "Hello?" I called, pushing the door open with my foot. The room was drenched in shadow, the only illumination coming from the streetlights bleeding through the blinds. My flashlight swept across the room, landing on a single chair positioned in the center, directly facing the doorway. It hadn't been there during my earlier rounds. My throat tightened as I took a cautious step inside. The air felt colder here, heavier, as if the room itself held its breath. I scanned every corner of the room, expecting someone, or something, to jump out from the shadows. But the room was empty. The chair, however, continued to unsettle me. Its deliberate placement felt wrong, as though it was meant to mock me for my presence. Backing out of the room, I left the door wide open and decided to search the rest of the wing. Every door I checked was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry or tampering. Frustrated and confused, I returned to the security office to review the camera footage. I rewound the footage, my fingers trembling as I paused on the frame showing the figure walking down the hallway. It was clearer than I remembered. The dark clothes obscured any defining features, but the silhouette was undeniably human, or at least, it looked that way. My stomach churned as I watched the figure approach the conference room. Just as it reached the door, the footage glitched. The screen went black for several seconds before flickering back to life, showing the hallway completely empty. There was no sign of the figure leaving. It had simply vanished. I replayed the footage on a loop, hoping I had missed something. But every time, the same eerie sequence played out, the figure, the glitch, the empty hallway. My gaze darted to the live feeds, scanning the building for any hint of movement. At first, everything appeared normal, but then I noticed something, a faint shadow in the corner of the security office. My heart raced as I turned, flashlight in hand, and swept the room. The beam of light revealed nothing but the familiar walls and shelves. But the shadow had been there, and it hadn't been mine. I locked the office door and sat back down, one eye glued to the monitors and the other scanning the room around me. The minutes dragged by like hours, my nerves fraying with every tick of the clock. I tried convincing myself that it was all in my head, that sleep deprivation was making me see things. But at 4 a.m., just as I was beginning to let my guard down, the feed for the East Wing glitched again. When it returned, the figure was standing in the same hallway, just outside the conference room. My breath hitched as I watched it stand motionless, its face obscured by shadows. Then, slowly, it raised a hand and waved. The gesture was calm, almost playful, as if it knew I was watching. My fingers fumbled with the radio as I called my supervisor, my voice cracking as I relayed what had happened. Their response was dismissive, assuring me they'd review the footage in the morning, but the lack of urgency only made my anxiety worse. When my shift finally ended at 6 a.m., I didn't bother sticking around. I grabbed my coat and practically sprinted to my car, the morning air biting against my face. That day, I slept with the lights on, unable to shake the image of the figure waving at me from the screen. The following night, determined to get answers, I asked one of the janitors if they had ever experienced anything strange in the building. "There've been stories," he said, lowering his voice. "People have heard footsteps in empty hallways. Doors open and close by themselves. Some say the building's haunted. But me? I've never seen anything." His words weren't exactly comforting. For weeks, I refused to patrol the East Wing alone, keeping a weapon in my desk drawer just in case. Though I never saw the figure again, its presence still haunted me. Even now, whenever I pass by the locked conference room, I feel its gaze lingering, an unshakable reminder that some encounters leave scars, even when the source of the fear disappears. Jogging at night had always been my sanctuary. Some people find peace in yoga or a good book, but for me, nothing compared to the tranquility of a late-night run. The world slowed down, the streets emptied, and the moonlight glimmered on the damp pavement like a silent witness to my thoughts. I knew my routes well, each twist and turn committed to memory after years of pounding the same paths through Grant Park. With my keys clenched in one hand and my instincts guiding me, I had never felt the need to be overly cautious. The night was mine, a brief escape from the chaos of the world. Spring nights in 2020 were colder than usual, but the chill didn't bother me. If anything, it spurred me on, my breath visible in the crisp air as I navigated the familiar trails. That evening was like any other, or at least, it started that way. I pulled into the small parking lot near the park entrance, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my tires. After tightening my shoelaces and securing my phone in the running pouch around my waist, I checked the time, 10:47 p.m. The zipper on the pouch clicked shut, the noise oddly sharp in the stillness. Slipping in my earbuds, I pressed play on my music, keeping the volume low enough to stay aware of my surroundings. The rhythmic thud of my sneakers against the gravel soon joined the soft hum of the music, creating a cadence that felt reassuringly normal. The first stretch of the trail wound through a thick canopy of trees before opening up near the pond, where the water shimmered faintly under the moonlight. A mile in, I noticed something, another set of footsteps, faint but distinct, blending with the crunch of my own. I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't unusual to come across another runner, especially in a park as large as this. But as I rounded a gentle curve in the trail, I glanced over my shoulder and spotted him. A runner, maybe 50 feet behind me, dressed in dark clothing with a hoodie pulled over his head. I faced forward again, telling myself it was no big deal. He wasn't exactly breathing down my neck. Still, a shiver worked its way up my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing at attention. I quickened my pace ever so slightly, and so did he. When I slowed down to adjust my playlist, his footsteps mirrored the change in rhythm, as if we were moving in sync. My heartbeat quickened, not from the exertion but from the creeping sense that something was wrong. It didn't feel like a coincidence. His pace wasn't casual, nor did it have the relaxed, fluid motion of someone jogging to unwind. It felt deliberate. I veered off the main path, taking a side trail that I rarely used. It was narrower and wound through a denser patch of trees. If he were just another runner, he'd keep going straight, I told myself. But when I looked over my shoulder, he was still there. My stomach twisted, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. Stay calm, I thought. Maybe he didn't even notice me. Maybe he just happened to be heading in the same direction. But my gut said otherwise. I made another unexpected turn, this time onto a gravel trail that cut through a small clearing. The moonlight bathed the open space, and I could see the trail stretching ahead in a winding arc. This was my test. If he followed me here, it wasn't a coincidence. I pulled out my earbuds and listened, my breath loud in the cold air. His footsteps remained steady, echoing mine with eerie precision. The way he moved wasn't natural, too controlled, too measured. I glanced over my shoulder again, catching a clearer look at him as he passed beneath a street lamp. His hoodie obscured most of his face, but his posture, rigid and purposeful, set every nerve on edge. I sped up, my legs burning as I pushed myself harder. The path curved ahead, leading to a stretch where the streetlights were more spaced out. I hoped the shadows would hide me, give me an edge. But his pace remained unwavering, never faltering or slowing. That's when I realized something even more unsettling. I couldn't hear him breathing. No heavy panting, no signs of exertion. It was as if the effort didn't affect him, like he wasn't even human. Desperation kicked in, overriding logic. I darted left, taking yet another side path that wound sharply uphill. The trail was rougher here, the gravel giving way to patches of dirt and scattered roots. I stumbled once but caught myself before falling, my fingers brushing against the cold ground. The footsteps behind me didn't waver. My breath came in ragged gasps now, every inhale burning my lungs. I couldn't afford to stop. Then, suddenly, the footsteps vanished. 1 second they were there, pounding relentlessly behind me, and the next, silence. I slowed down, my ears straining to detect any sound. My pulse thundered in my ears as I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees that loomed like dark sentinels on either side of the path. Had he hidden in the woods, waiting for me to pass so he could ambush me? My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone, using its flashlight to pierce the darkness. Nothing. Just empty trees and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. I took a cautious step forward, then another. A twig snapped behind me, and I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the night. He was there, standing barely 10 feet away, directly in the middle of the path. My breath hitched as I took a step back. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound strong. He didn't answer. He just stood there, motionless and silent, his face hidden beneath the hood. "Stay back," I warned, gripping my phone like it was a weapon. "I'm calling the police." Still, he didn't move. The way he stood, so rigid and devoid of any natural body language, sent terror coursing through me. Then, without a word, he took a step forward. That was all it took. I bolted, my legs screaming in protest as I sprinted down the path. The trees blurred around me, the gravel crunching loudly beneath my pounding feet. I didn't dare look back. I could hear his footsteps again, gaining speed, closing the gap. My vision tunneled, focused solely on the faint glow of the streetlights ahead. The exit was close, just a few more turns, and I'd be back on the main road. I burst through the trees, the streetlights casting halos of light on the pavement. My car was parked just beyond the lot. I could see it, tauntingly close. A sharp inhale behind me sent a fresh wave of terror through my veins, and I pushed harder, my muscles screaming for relief. As I reached the sidewalk, I risked a glance back. He had stopped at the edge of the park, standing in the shadows as if some invisible barrier held him there. His face, briefly illuminated by the passing headlights of a car, was devoid of emotion, just a blank, vacant stare that made my stomach churn. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he melted into the trees. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, the doors locked and the engine running. My hands shook violently as I gripped the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing there, but the lot was empty. I haven't gone for a nighttime jog since that night. The thought of returning to that park makes my chest tighten with fear. Whatever he was, whoever he was, I'm certain of one thing: he wasn't just another runner. And the worst part? I'll never know what he wanted. The way he moved wasn't normal. His strides were too precise, too perfectly timed with mine, as if we were synced in a grotesque rhythm. It wasn't the casual pace of a fellow jogger or the heavy plod of someone struggling to keep up. It was controlled, measured, and eerily silent. My mind raced as I stole another glance over my shoulder, catching a better glimpse of him beneath the glow of a nearby street lamp. He looked ordinary enough, just another runner in a black hoodie and worn running shoes, but something about him felt all wrong. There were no signs of exertion. His chest didn't rise and fall from heavy breathing, and his movements lacked the loose, natural sway of someone out for a run. He was too rigid, too focused. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. My pace quickened, my breathing becoming more ragged as adrenaline flooded my veins. The gravel path ahead curved, leading to a section where the street lights were sparse and the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly. I pushed myself harder, hoping the darkness would give me the cover I needed to lose him. But every time I dared to glance back, he was still there, never falling behind, never closing the gap, always maintaining that perfect distance. It was as if he was toying with me, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, just as suddenly as the footsteps had started, they stopped. I slowed to a jog, then a walk, my breath hitching as I strained to listen. Silence. The kind of silence that wasn't comforting but suffocating, wrapping itself around me like a vice. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scanned the path behind me. Nothing. The trees lining the trail swayed gently in the night breeze, their branches casting ghostly shadows on the ground. Had he ducked into the woods? Was he waiting for me to let my guard down? I turned in a slow circle, the beam of my phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The light trembled slightly in my shaky grip as I took a cautious step forward, then another. And that's when I heard it, a single footstep directly behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around, the light landing on him. He stood no more than 10 feet away, too close for comfort. My heart pounded violently, and a chill spread down my spine as I took a step back. "What the hell do you want?" I demanded, my voice cracking slightly. He didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless, staring at me from beneath the shadow of his hoodie. His silence was more unsettling than any threat he could have spoken. I took another step back, my hands trembling as I gripped my phone like it could somehow protect me. "Back off," I warned, louder this time. "I'll call the cops." Still, he didn't move. The way he stood, as if frozen in time, triggered something primal inside me, a fear so deep it bypassed logic and went straight to survival. And then, he took a step forward. I bolted. My legs burned as I sprinted down the trail, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The trees blurred past me, the dim glow of the streetlights flickering like dying embers. My only focus was the exit ahead, the small parking lot where my car was parked just a few blocks away. The gravel crunched loudly beneath my feet, each step a desperate attempt to create distance between us. But the sound of his footsteps returned, pounding against the path in perfect time with mine, growing louder as he gained on me. Panic clawed at my chest as I cut sharply to the left, veering onto a side trail that I knew would lead me directly to the park's exit. My muscles screamed in protest, but I didn't dare slow down. Then, just as I heard him inhale sharply behind me, a hand grazed my arm. Pure terror erupted within me, and I tore forward with everything I had, ignoring the burning in my legs and the ache in my lungs. The faint glow of the streetlights at the park's entrance came into view, and I pushed myself harder, fueled by the primal need to escape. I burst onto the sidewalk, my shoes slapping against the concrete as I whipped around to face the trail. He had stopped abruptly at the edge of the park, standing just beyond the line where the shadows met the light. For a moment, it was as if an invisible barrier held him there, preventing him from following me any further. A car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating his face. I wish it hadn't. His features were twisted in a way that made my stomach churn, a blank, almost lifeless expression with wide, vacant eyes and a slightly parted mouth. It wasn't anger or rage that I saw in his gaze. It was something far worse, a detached, hollow curiosity, as if he were observing me like an insect caught under glass. And then, just as quickly as I had seen him, he backed away, disappearing into the trees as if he had never been there. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands shook violently as I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the door and slide inside. I locked the doors, my fingers trembling as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I gripped the steering wheel, struggling to catch my breath. Tears streamed down my face, and I didn't know if they were from relief or fear. I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing there, but the lot was empty. He was gone. At least, for now. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the eerie stillness, the way he had reached for me without a word. Who was he? What did he want? And why had he chosen me? The questions looped endlessly in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. The next morning, I filed a police report, but there wasn't much they could do. There were no cameras in the park, and my description of a man in a black hoodie and running shoes didn't exactly narrow things down. To them, he was just another faceless stranger in the dark. I haven't gone jogging at night since. Even driving past the park fills me with unease, my eyes scanning the trees, expecting to see him lurking just out of sight. Maybe he was just an unhinged guy looking to mess with someone. Or maybe it was something far more sinister. I'll never know. All I know is that I escaped, and I don't ever want to find out what would have happened if I hadn't. If these stories sent chills down your spine, make sure to hit that like button and share the fear with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next spine-tingling upload. Have a terrifying tale of your own? Drop it in the comments or send it in. We'd love to feature your story. Stay safe, stay alert, and remember, sometimes the scariest things hide in the quiet of the night. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next nightmare.